last semester, I convened a colloquium. We were allowed to come in here and into the vault so that faculty here could get to know or renew their acquaintance with the Brauer Permanent Collection. And we met once a week. Was it for the whole semester or 8 weeks? I don't know. It went very fast. But we were looking at this painting, Cool Morning in the Prairie by Junius Sloan. And in fact, these two presenters were talking about it. Teresa Bals-Elsholz and Laurie Eberhardt, biologist, meteorologist, and Bharat Babu Ganesh Babu, said, you know what, we shouldn't keep this to ourselves. And so that's how the idea of Thursdays at the Brauer was born. And this presentation that you're about to see. It's called Studying Dunes and Weather, two versions of the STEM Teachers Brauer Museum. Art museums are not just for artists, they're for all of us. And this is one of the greatest teaching resources we have on our campus. And this is the best classroom we have in our classroom. And so STEM, of course, stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. I don't think we'll be doing any math today. Maybe a little bit. Okay, all right. Both Laurie Eberhardt and Teresa Bals-Elsholz share their respective departments, biology and geography and meteorology. Laurie since 2018, Teresa since 2012. Laurie studied at Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana, then received her master's and PhD at University of Florida, Gainesville. She is our environmental biologist. Now maybe every biologist is an environmentalist, I don't know. But Laurie is our expert on the yellow-bellied sapsucker, on the, I believe it's a particular, is it the Canadian wren?
Carolina.
The Carolina wren, I'm way off on that one. My geography is terrible. And invasive shrubs and plants. She also was the person who I think first developed a course for non-science majors in the science of the dunes. And so these images she'll be talking about are primary sources, I guess. Something like that. Laurie is a prolific scholar. She has published, given presentations, won teaching awards, been nominated for teaching awards. The one that really struck me was, I think, 3 times for the student research thing, having to do with VU student research. And we will celebrate that on April 28th, right? And you have students involved? Of course you do. Teresa, like Laurie, is a star teacher, prolific researcher. She did her work at, first she went to, I wrote this down, but I'm going to remember it. Her undergraduate degree is from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. Then she got a master's degree in air science, atmospheric science at Texas Tech, and then finished her program at the University of Albany. Her presentations and research go 4 pages, single space. I did see that you are an expert on the split jet stream. Are we going to talk about the split jet stream today?
In the southern hemisphere, and it was a group project.
That's the other thing. In my field, we all write our own papers. We don't talk to other people. Whereas in the sciences, it's teamwork. And it's amazing. I'm glad we've got more than one meteorologist or geographer in the room, because this is the team that works together. This is the functional family on our campus. because it's amazing how many of the articles and presentations that Teresa has presented have Craig there and Bart there and others. And she is also a remarkable citizen of the university. She has chaired the Faculty Concerns Committee. She does all kinds of things. And so that's enough from me. I give you, and you can give a warm applause to our presenters, Professors Bals-Elsholz and Eberhardt. Now, just a minute, before I begin, can you look, Amanda, and see if people out there are hearing us okay? They'll wave, someone wave their hands so that they can hear us. I'm looking for Ken Klein especially. Okay. All right, okay.
You can start.
Wow, thank you for that lovely introduction. It's so nice to see you out here. Thanks for coming. Can you hear me? Yes?
Keep it real close.
All right. And gosh, hello to all those people out there. I think we have a group out there too, so thanks for coming and joining us today. We're going to talk about some landscapes that were done in this region. And we're going to start here with this one by Junius Sloan called Cool Morning. Some of the things I'm going to talk about are the real small things here, so maybe I'll talk about them, but later you can come up and look. But I think Teresa's got the bigger stuff. Maybe I'll let her start with meteorology. You want to start out?
Oh, okay. All right. Absolutely. So I'm Teresa Bals-Elsholz, so we were off camera on the introduction. So, yes, without even knowing the title of this, I would make my students perhaps come in here and say, guess, what's going on this? And there's so many clues in this simple paintings. This beautiful painting of someone walking in a field behind the cows. But there's this fog. You can see there's a fog kind of down in a little bit of a valley. And you can see trees poking out ahead. Faint sky with the clouds just lit up. And even the distant clouds kind of lit up. So that tells you it's either sunset or it's sunrise, undoubtedly. So we're not getting a there's enough duskiness to it. We don't know what we're seeing. Well, I would hazard a guess that this is morning because of that fog, because of that mist that we see that settled in the lowest part of the picture of the valley, the long valley there. That tells us that the whole day has cooled, the night has caused cooling. And so with the mostly clear skies, just a few high, thin, cirrocumulus clouds, just kind of those wispy, slightly puffy, high clouds, we know that there's been cooling all night long. And when you get that cooling all night long, and the ground is slightly warm, that moisture might evaporate and help to form clouds. Well, it doesn't just disperse away. If it's a really cool morning, all through the night, the warm air from the day before doesn't go that far away. It's just above the surface. It's called an inversion. We won't do the math. And so that traps the fog. That traps the mist underneath. And so I would make my students go find me something that shows that. And we call that a skew-T. It just shows what the atmosphere looks like in profile. And you would see that. You would see that it was very cool at the surface and moist. And then it probably warms up a little bit above the surface and then starts to cool off as the atmosphere does with height. Also very still. And another reason we know that this is what's going on, there's a definite level to it. And then we can see there's a house there with a little bit of smoke coming out of the chimney. And it kind of stays there for a little bit. It's a little bit horizontal, a little white smoke right there. And then it slowly goes up. So there's just enough warmth in that cold air for that smoke to rise. But there's no wind because it doesn't really go anywhere. It kind of hangs out in that cool air, and then when it's warm enough, it just kind of goes up a little bit. So that's what that tells me. Just very sweet, with so much meteorology there. So I would guess we're under high pressure in a summer morning, or maybe spring morning. Laurie can tell us that maybe by the plant life what's going on. And just that stillness of a morning that you would see. And whether you're in Indiana or Nebraska, I've certainly, do tassel corn in such a 4 a.m. type of a morning when it's very moist. So that's the meteorology I see. So I want my students to come in and kind of look at that. And I think we're open to questions too.
Absolutely. All right, so season. There's some really cool detail on flowers here in the front of the painting. And, and right here is a coneflower, pretty distinctly a coneflower, which would be mid-summer on. So I think we're talking about a summer thing. But we also have a lot of other things, including some red blobs that are probably monarda or bee balm, common prairie plant, and a blue thing in here which might be a vervain or a speedwell. And so we have a really interesting mix. I think he captures really well the diversity in the prairie. That's one of the things that prairies are known for, is the large diversity of these forbs or herbaceous plants. So this was an Illinois landscape or a Midwest landscape, which my understanding is that this was one of the first times when this landscape was sort of appreciated to paint it in a landscape form, along with some of these Dudleys. My interest, though, is especially with this right here. I think this is a curious, the one sort of woody tree thing that we can see. We can get over on this side, this one right here. Anybody have any guesses on what that might be? He painted these plants in a way that's sort of anatomically correct. You could really kind of see some of the detail enough to identify them.
Is that a dead tree?
It's alive. It has tiny leaves.
Would it be a fruit tree?
It might be a fruit tree. Why do you think it's a fruit tree?
It doesn't look, it's low to the ground,
Mm-hmm.
maybe pruned.
Oh, okay.
It's outside the fence, right?
It's near the fence.
It's near the fence, but
Which
I
I
think it's on
think
the
is
other side of the
significant.
fence to keep the cows away from it.
Then mulberry.
Mulberry. I think it's a mulberry because how do mulberries travel? They travel in a bird. And the bird lands somewhere and deposits the seed of the mulberry along with some lovely fertilizer. And it's very common to find mulberries along fence rows. So I think
Of course.
it's a fruit tree.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably one with a tiny seed.
And we could grow silk there, right?
Well, interesting. Very interesting. So the native mulberry here is red mulberry. That could be a red mulberry. Red and white mulberry look very similar. But white mulberry was introduced to the United States for silk production.
Uh-huh.
And I looked up when white mulberries were introduced. And it was in the early 1800s. This painting was painted in 1866.
Yeah.
So it could actually be one of the first paintings of a non-native invasive species. But I don't know. I can't tell white from red mulberries.
So I know my mulberry tree that's next to my garden in shades, too much of it, is it's late with the leaves, and that was going to be my guess, because we had those full trees everywhere else, but this one's a little later, so the frost doesn't kill the fruit or the blossoms in fact, and so the birds love it. So that was going to be my guess, because it didn't have as many leaves as some of the other trees.
Very good.
So the weather tells me that that is a late spring, early summer for this mulberry.
Cool, cool. All right, well, that's great. Excellent. So we have a lot of other paintings to see, so maybe we'll move on. But does anybody have any questions about what we talked about, the Sloan, before we move on?
What is the title of that?
A cool morning.
Cool morning in the prairie.
Cool morning
on
on the
the
prairie.
Oh, good morning on the prairie, excuse me.
Or is it in the prairie or on the prairie, Richard?
On.
There.
That's what I read.
I'd like to know what the fence
On.
is. Does it fence the
What kind of wood?
cows out of
Kind of.
a garden, or does it fence the pasture, cows
Yeah.
into the pasture? What does it fence?
I don't know enough about animal husbandry to know what that would look like.
It's so big, I would guess pasture, between pastures.
They might rotate between pastures, right? No. And what is it, kind of wood? I don't know, can't tell from the name, but in this era, maybe black locust or white oak would be really good fence material.
It does
Wood
look
products.
wild on the other side.
Yeah.
It doesn't look cultivated.
Yeah, maybe less grazed.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we should move on to some Dudleys. So this is Junia Sloan again painting the landscape of the Midwest, as you know, seeing the beauty in the Midwest. Frank Dudley was also one of those early painters to appreciate the beauty where other painters maybe hadn't seen the beauty in the Midwest, in this case the dunes. So we have the rest of the paintings we have to talk about today are from Frank Dudley. And maybe we can move to this one next, Tremont. Do you want to start with meteorology or?
Oh, doesn't matter. You can start this time.
All right. So, yeah, a little bit about Frank Dudley. So he's painting at a time when there was a lot of interest in the dunes from folks in Chicago especially, including a lot of interest in, well, let's see. One of the people that was famous here is Henry Chandler Coles, who studied the ecology of the dunes and really looked carefully at the vegetation that was here and how vegetation is connected to the environment and the microclimate where it's living and how it changes over time. And he wrote about that, and Frank Dudley would have been informed by some of the things that Henry Chandler Coles discovered. Also, other people that Frank Dudley was associated with, and also Frank himself, Dudley himself was very interested in preservation of the dunes. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But I think Frank Dudley has a real appreciation for both the biology and other, maybe a little bit of the geology of what's going on in the area. So things that I'm seeing in this, one is the coastline of Lake Michigan with the waves pounding in. You can feel the power of those waves, a lot of wind, and so there's a lot of sand being moved around here by both water and wind. The longshore currents along Lake Michigan are moving the sand, maybe we'll talk about this connection to meteorology, moving the sand along the beach, and if there's anything sticking out, the sand kind of gets stuck and starves the area on one side and pushes sand on the other. And I think because this is not a smooth line of a coast, I think we're actually seeing that. He's appreciating that. There's stuff going on here to catch sand. Possibly whatever is sticking up here represents something more under the sand here, catching the sand as it comes around and making this kind of point of sand. And then we see the wide open beach, open sand, blowing sand into a foredune with pretty open sand still. And then at the top of that foredune and on back, you start to see some vegetation. And that's an important thing that's going on here is the vegetation is part of the system that starts stabilizing that sand and keeping it from moving more. And the more it gets stabilized, the more different kinds of vegetation can move in. And so here we see as we move back from the lake, more vegetation types, maybe some shrubs, maybe some smaller trees, and by the time you get to the top of that ridge, they're pretty big trees. So even here in this painting, where we don't see a whole lot of the landscape on land, you can still get a feel for some changes as we go from the lake back in. Maybe I'll stop there and we'll think about meteorology.
So I think this one's probably the favorite of the group of Met majors in the back. And unfortunately, we tend to like weather that's not as nice, except for maybe today, we could do it now. It's cloudy and rain and snow out there. But this one is cloudy and dark, and so it certainly portends a storm somewhere off in the distance, either coming or going, but probably knowing the perspective here that usually Dudley painted Indiana sort of area, that this one is probably off to the southwest and approaching. The brush strokes here give us a sense of these clouds are already precipitating. The brush strokes, I don't know if you can see them, but the brush strokes are all on top of this horizontal dark off to the, what I would think would be the south-southwest. And then you get a little bit lighter. And you get a sense of some puffy clouds behind there of our storms coming. But then he's got vertical brush strokes. And that just sent that sense that already we're starting to get some precipitation. Already we're starting to get some clouds going up or down. And just giving that sense of something's coming. And then you look at the waves and you know something's coming. It's already started somewhere on the lake. And those waves are already coming. They're not here. You could be standing there going, oh, this is fine. And you better watch those waves because it's telling you that in the distance, the wind is pushing the waves across the lake towards you and really turning it up. Those are pretty good white caps on that lake. And I almost wonder if the pinks in the paint are a reflection of the sky, maybe in the distance, or if they're churning up sand. So really kind of churning up, like Laurie said, this process here of the sand being moved around back and forth. If we're not churning up some sand, and you're seeing that in the waves because of that wind, and if you've been after a good storm, you know that that landscape changes because of the weather. But he still has, there's puffs, and then that forebodingness. So we like this meteorologist because that's something to forecast, to pay attention to. Don't put your boat out.
Do you think those are tents on the shoreline there? There's kind of these triangular things?
Oh, could be tents,
So that has to be
yeah.
housing at that time. I think
This
that-
was painted in 23. There would have been some beach houses that were maybe kind of a transition between tents and houses, sort of. But yeah,
Should be talking.
I'd say likely tents on the stuff that are closest to the shore.
Yeah,
Just getting building materials there is tricky.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. Did I see somebody else with a comment about this one? Or a question?
Right.
Yeah.
What is the name of the
Tremont.
tree? Oh, okay.
Tremont, and it refers to 3 big tall dunes in this region. And one of them is Mount Tom, which is the tallest of the dunes in the national, the state park, and the whole area. How many people have been on the top of Mount Tom? I thought there might be quite a few. Yeah, good, good. What do you, when you think about being in the dunes, on Mount Tom or other places, what words describe what you feel? Anybody have any words to describe what your sense is out there when you're out there on Mount Tom or elsewhere?
Grateful.
No, grateful, yeah, good.
I suggest awe.
What's that?
Awe.
Awe, yeah.
Expansive.
Expansive, yes. Excellent.
I feel small, too.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
Great.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, good.
I also feel out of breath, I forget.
Yes, that landscape is right. It's the 3 dune challenge up there, you can find all the dunes, right. So good. Well, many people at this time, in the 1900s and into the early 1900s, were definitely feeling that sort of, gosh, this is a gorgeous place, and couldn't we do something to preserve this? Or shouldn't we be doing something to preserve this? Because at the same time, we're also seeing a lot of industrial development in the region, concerned that all of this could disappear as we mined all the sand for the important uses of sand, etc. So this painting, I'd like to talk about this great big painting next. This was done in 1918, and it was, Dudley painted this kind of in coupling with a lot of other activities to try to really raise awareness of this landscape and the beauty of it and the importance of preserving it. And so I think in this painting he tries to capture some of the things you just mentioned. Awesome, beautiful terrain that makes you breathe hard because it's so up and down, right? So this is called, get the name right, of Sky and Song? The Land of Sky and Song, yeah. This one, really, to me, it has a lot of ecology. The ecological story that he captures here is remarkable. So what's going on is we have a very dynamic system. Lake Michigan would be off this way. And this is one of those huge dunes that's got a lot of open sand. Sorry. And the open sand would be moving with all that wind and the storm over there, that Tremont painting. And it moves and it blows from the lake inward. And as it comes up over that dune and deposits in the backside, the whole dune is moving, right? And if you folks that have been in the dune certainly know this. The whole dune's moving, and in fact, it's moving right in and swallowing these trees. So in this painting, we get this feeling of the dune kind of swallowing or inundating these trees. He has another painting with a tree that's dead in the sand called Vanquished. The dune is really swallowing these trees. But at the same time, interesting, down here we feel the tension of the push and pull, and down here, what is this vegetation? Marram grass, right? This dune grass is one of the first plants that can grow in this sand that moves around so much. And the first thing it does is it sets down those roots is stabilize that sand and keep it from moving. So this grass feels like it's coming this way and stabilizing the advance of the sand this way. So it's like this tension of who's going to win, right? Sand coming, grass coming. And in the middle are caught all these trees. Anybody have any trees they can identify in this picture? Any guesses for any of these trees?
Oaks.
Cedar?
Yeah, this one has a real distinctive shape. I think this is a red cedar. Oaks, a lot of the red are probably oaks. They turn red in the fall. So do sassafras. Probably plenty of sassafras here. How about in here, these dark trees?
Hemlock?
We don't have a lot of hemlock in the dunes. Good guess. It could be hemlock. It might be we don't have hemlock now because they've all been cut. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's definitely hemlock up in southern Michigan. So these could be hemlock. I think this stature right here of this tree is white pine. That tall, kind of sticking out with branches like this. But hemlock is an interesting question. It could be something. Cool. All right, I've said a lot about this. I'll let Teresa talk.
Yeah, so this one we can look at in a couple perspectives of the atmosphere. So just definitely fall, the blue sky just evokes a cool fall morning with a decent amount of wind, because those puffy clouds are kind of, you can just picture them scooting along. They're both white and gray, and so in a little curl to them, or actually maybe the gray one in front of a white one. So you just get a sense of a very brisk fall morning or fall day. It's pretty, not morning because we can see such a good expanse. We don't see a ton of shadows in this one. But then you could also go longer perspective and think about the meteorology and the geography, if Mike will let me, the physical geography of why these dunes are here with these moving dunes and the constant wind from the north. And my colleague Craig here loves lake effect snow, and that's what those north winds come racing down Lake Michigan and help to push that sand day after day with the north winds in the wintertime. If there's not enough ice for plants up there, and usually not, just blowing right through. And I think that's what you're seeing in the background, is maybe an older set of dunes. I know when from up in the Lake LaPorte County, we're all flat marsh, but there's a series of dunes, and they're very old dunes. They're the former dunes of the lake, of where the glaciers stopped, and then came back and then stopped. And so we're seeing a sense of the climate of the past hidden in those dunes and what it's done for us. And then the thought of that wind, you know that there's lake effect snow because of that constant wind from the north blowing across Lake Michigan. So we're getting ready with that open dune, moving it on the south side, undoubtedly south side of the dune. We're getting ready for some lake effect snow in this fall weather, and my colleague over here is hopeful that we're going to get good snow.
Even
So that's
ready
kind
for
of,
summer.
you know, it's a different way, more of a climatology way to look at this, a longer term of what's going on.
I should have said the ecology of this. All of this, everything you see in this scene was probably at one point, way back in the past, bear sand. And so the story of this whole region along the coast is dunes getting exposed, grass stabilizing it, other stuff being able to grow after the grass. Like already we see some probably dunes goldenrod in here, and other forests coming in, and then eventually some shrubs, and then eventually trees. And so all of this forest back here is that stabilized sand with soil development that supports trees. And then the dune, once again, starts the whole thing over again as it comes in to bury these trees who cannot tolerate being buried. Does anybody have any questions over this one? No.
Are those foreground trees being buried and dying?
Right, yeah. There are a few species of trees that can tolerate being buried. One of them is a cottonwood, but I could not for sure see anything here that says cottonwood to me.
It would be yellow, right? The leaves.
Probably in the fall, right? So I don't think this particular picture has cottonwood. I think we've got cottonwood over here. We'll get to this page in a minute. But
Sumac?
oaks, sumac could be here. Oh yeah, definitely in this color stuff here. Oaks can't tolerate being buried. Pines can't tolerate being buried. Maples could certainly not be. So lots of trees, just once they're buried by sand, that's it. They can't move on. Other questions?
When I look at the picture, it is telling us a lot of stories about the physical features of this picture. I can see this side, it is slopey, and there are no plants to prevent something like, it's like something is happening like soil erosion. Yes.
Yes, the
If
erosion
it
is a good
rains,
name for that.
yes,
Right.
and then it pushes the dunes
Yes, and you
this
can
side,
feel
and
that.
because there are no plants to hold
Right.
the what?
Right,
The
exactly.
dunes. And I think some of the trees there, they are still there, even if there is that soil erosion. I think it's the type of roots, maybe it's the taproot which grows deep. Even if there is some changes of weather, you will find the trees are still anchored by the roots.
Yes.
They are still stable.
So are you thinking if these have tap roots that go way down, they could actually move almost with the sand?
Not because of the type of the roots which the trees have, even if there is that erosion, the trees cannot be uprooted
Oh, yes.
because of the type of
Right.
the roots,
The
the
taproot,
trees. Yeah, the taproot, because it grows down,
Right.
it's not shallow,
Yeah.
you see?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I don't know if they were just planting. I think even this side there was something like erosion was taking place. Then maybe somebody thought of planting like grass.
Well, it could have been planted, but I think in 1918 no one would have been planting grass out here. But this was probably a dune face more recently than, say, back here. This was something that had been blowing and dune moving, 50 years ago versus 300 years ago versus now it's moving here.
Yeah, maybe there were seeds,
Yeah.
those type of seeds which can be blown by the wind.
Right.
Where they land, they
Right.
start.
Thinking about seed dispersal again.
Yeah, I
it's
think
good.
so.
Even if a tree has a taproot though, and can tap into what it needs down there, if it gets buried in sand and loses the access to oxygen to its roots, it won't survive, or at least oaks and maples won't survive.
Are the majority of those trees, they are so burnt red, kind of. What kind of trees would that be? A forest of oak?
So the really common ones out here that turn red would be oaks, but also sassafras, and something called black gum, or tupelo is another name for that. That also turns bright red. That one is in wet areas, and I can't tell how wet this is. But many of those trees that are in that area turn that sort of rusty red. Which one shall we do next?
Do the next one, kind of goes with that.
Here?
Yeah.
All right. Gosh, anybody recognize these blue flowers?
Lupin.
Lupin, yeah. So this one is a very cool sort of specialist on this dunes habitat. Once we get the sand stabilized and there's a bit of forest, but it's still dry and open, there may be frequent fires coming through here because this area naturally burns a lot and people also started fires. And this plant does really well in that kind of habitat. And we picked this one out partly because of the story that can be told by this lupin. This lupin is a food plant for a particular insect that's endangered called the Carner blue butterfly. And at the time Frank Dudley painted this painting, there were probably lots of Carner blue butterflies here. But just recently, in the Indiana Dunes National Park and State Park have done a lot to try to manage to get this plant to grow. It's a very special plant, it's beautiful, we love to see it, and we're worried about these butterflies. But just a few years ago, the butterflies all came out in March with a really hot spell, and the plant had come out. And as a result, most of the little butterflies died. They didn't have any food to eat because the plant wasn't there. And as of right now, it looks like the butterfly's gone from the fields. So it's kind of a climate mismatch here. Maybe I should, you tell this story. This is the climate story.
Well, I like this one because I got my PhD, my doctorate in New York, in Albany, New York. And the new Carner butterfly is also in New York, in Albany, New York. There are pine barrens with sand in New York, which is at the confluence of the Mohawk and the Hudson River, where the Mohawk flows into the Hudson River. In between the Catskills and the Adirondacks and the Berkshires, and so there's a lot of sand there. And so that tells me that the climate of New York is about the same as here in Indiana. We're about the same latitude, and it's also the spread of the right temperature for the lupins. They also do the now prescribed burns in the pine barrens. It's a protected area. So that is why I like it, and I was excited to see that the Carner butterflies wish they would still be here. It just tells you a hint, even though we don't see any weather in this, other than it's a gorgeous spring morning, late April?
Lupin's out.
Or
This
May.
is going to be like May.
May, yeah. I always look for them, and I always look too soon,
Yeah.
so May. Because I get them down, I live in pretty south of the dunes, a good 30 minutes south or 20 miles south. And so along 30, there's a lot of places where the railroad tracks are, and you can see great swaths of the lupins.
Well, it might come out in April there. It's much, much later at the lake.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know when it comes out.
Late
there.
April, yeah. And so that tells me about the climatology of our local locations being similar. And so another way to think about this. But yeah, those trees are in pretty full throttle. That tells you pretty late in the season. So.
Yeah, I think like May. Anybody want to take a guess at this tree? What this tree is?
It's got a lot of roots.
It does have a lot of roots. And in fact, I think this is a tree that can tolerate the moving sand a little bit, unlike what we were talking about for the oaks. I don't think this is an oak. I think this has the right shape and leaf type for a linden or basswood. And that's one of the trees in the dunes that can tolerate having its roots sort of undermined or actually a little bit buried. It's a little bit more tolerant of that, and you often see these trees that almost look like they're ready to get up and walk because their roots are sort of sticking out. So I think that matches a basswood in this area. Any questions about that? All right, I'm going to let you talk first on this one.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, you can just feel the wind in this one. I mean, look at those trees. He just had the wind to his back, thankfully, so the sand wasn't blowing in his face. The trees are just bowed over. The clouds are bowed over. The brush strokes are bowed over. They said bowed over. They said bowed over. Sorry. The grasses, everything's leaning with the wind, and even the waves. You can see the waves aren't in the same direction. They're coming into the shore, and that's how waves work. They work at an angle to the wind. Ekman spiral, that's as close as I'm going to get to boundary layer stuff. And so this to me looks like a sunny day with a pretty brisk wind going. Just enough warmth so you can see the sun, definitely a sunny day. So more of a summer day. Bright reflection, almost a vertical reflection of sunlight. That sunlight is just, had to have been blinding to paint this. That's so yellow over here. That's a lot of sunshine. So pretty close to being overhead to give us that much reflection. So telling us what time of year it was, with a good brisk wind, and just enough heat to start to get us some puffy clouds, and maybe we'll see some later in the day as the land starts to heat up. And gives us a little boundary with the lake breeze pushing in, and maybe we'll have a boundary somewhere between the land and the lake as the breeze coming off the lake heads inland to where the land is warming up, and maybe there's enough moisture to give us some afternoon thunderstorms, is what I might see in this. That's a good wind, or a different kind of wind.
I feel like we should have like a plant right here, because this thing is gonna blow off the easy. So I agree with you about late summer, or midsummer. So again, at the shore with the moving sand, we would have a lot of that marram grass or dune grass. And this looks like it's in flower. Grass has that flower that sticks up that's a little bit brownish colored. So I think this is kind of a late summer on, or midsummer on. Again, this is probably a cottonwood tree. So those can live right out there at the front edge of the dunes because they can be buried or unburied or just really tolerant of that kind of dry, moving sand environment. In fact, these could be young cottonwoods all the way across here. And then in the forefront here, we've got some shrubs. And these look very much like sand cherries to me. And I find, as I look through a lot of the Dudley pictures, we don't have many more here, I guess, but a lot of paintings, he painted this. He really liked this species. He stuck this species in all over. Well, it's very common to do, so maybe you just saw it a lot. But it's got this sort of, it never gets very tall, kind of a longer leaf catching in the wind here. Beautiful white flowers in the spring. But again, I don't think we're in the spring season here. So once again, I'm just representing this sort of foredune beginning of the plant succession that would eventually become a forest if this didn't keep blowing and moving sand over. Quick, yep.
What did he call that one?
This was called Wind from the North. Painted later. Yeah, good name, huh? When was this painted? Do you remember? I wrote this down somewhere. 1944. He's a different style. I'm not the art person here, but apparently this is quite a different style than we've seen earlier.
And the one with the lupine, what was the name of that? I don't remember. Is that it?
We couldn't.
You don't know?
We don't know. Usually the label's on the back and we couldn't find the label, so we'll have to go into the file.
Okay.
We're calling it Linden and Lubin.
Okay.
All right. Other question? So this last one over here was my favorite to talk about with you when the fall, because we sort of ended up having a bit of an argument over whether this was snow or sand, this whitish stuff. So anybody have an opinion whether we're seeing? Okay, so it's a dunes landscape, kind of the back. We're kind of in this kind of zone, right? Sort of back here in the forested area, but an open slope. We have a tree here with some roots exposed, kind of clinging onto the slope. And there's this whitish stuff around this tree. Is that the open sand like we've been seeing over here, or is it snow?
Ants, let's do ants.
Okay. How many think it's sand, open sand? Okay, how many think it's snow? Oh.
Med majors.
Yeah. Okay, what did you think?
I got snow,
Okay.
Yes.
and I think it's on the trees.
Yeah,
It's on the tree.
we got it right here too. Yeah.
Well, couldn't it be cottonwood? I mean, that.
Cottonwood. I would like that. That's true. That could be the cottonwood. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so what season are we in? What do you think?
I think it's summer, which is why I don't think it's snow. I think it's the leaves are too far out for it to be a late snow in spring.
Summertime.
But I like the cottonwood idea.
It's so colorful in the summer. Yeah.
Does that look like a cottonwood?
I think that this is an oak, and it's in flower. Because my conclusion on this one was that it's spring, early spring, and we're seeing the trees in flower. But that's an interesting, I had not even thought about cottonwood, which comes down and almost looks like snow in June. So I suppose it could be, though the cotton, not sure it would gather on the slope quite like that from cottonwood. It might go down and gather at the bottom. Not sure.
To me, the colors of the trees were light enough that I thought the colors of the leaves are vague, but they're a light enough color that I thought maybe it was spring as well with a late snow. And the bright, bright green on the ground of, to me, a fresh grass, a new grass. That's why I thought perhaps of spring with some remnants of snow or a fresh snow that we might have just gotten, and the sun's going to get rid of. The clouds are just breaking up.
Yeah, I think, does the sky match spring? You don't know.
Yeah. Stratus, I mean, they're just kind of, they're pretty windblown, because they're kind of flat, with breaks in them, but, so there's, yeah, it could be fall or spring on those clouds, don't you guys think? Yeah, I mean, it's just not enough definition to them. It's after something in a sense is what it looks like to me. After something more precipitable happened, more.
Can you tell what the branch on the corner is?
I looked at that for a while and I cannot. I don't know. I couldn't quite get enough leaf out of it. It could be a sassafras. It has kind of a, it looks like a leaf like this, but I don't know. Not sure. Yeah, definitely something sneaking in there. Then we have some interesting color here. A lot of red down here. Baby oak trees, when they first come out, have a lot of red pigment in their leaves, possibly to protect them from getting eaten by caterpillars. But in any case, this could be baby oaks, or it could be, there's a lot of blueberry out there that comes out kind of red as a reddish stem. So there could be, I don't think those are flowers. I think those are probably reddish leaves or reddish stems. But I don't know. That's assuming this is spring and it's not. Yeah?
I think it's interesting that both of the painters that we're talking about today taught us how to see something beautiful that we might not see it as beautiful otherwise.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The first poem in literature, major poem to be about the prairies was
John, no one's going to be able to hear you.
William Cullen Bryant wrote a poem called The Prairies. It's one of the first great long poems in our canon. And if you just Google William Cullen Bryant, The Prairies, he'll talk about this kind of thing as, we didn't have a name for it in English, so that's why we use the French word prairie. But they talk about it then as the Great American Desert. But he was one of the first, and I believe his son had some contact with Junius Sloan. Richard, am I remembering that correctly?
Who's that?
William Cullen Bryant's son and Junius Sloan had some relationship.
William Cullen Bryant's brothers and mother moved to Princeton, Illinois. And that is where Junius Sloan stayed for a couple of years to paint portraits there. He was the town portraitist. And there's some of the documents, the letters. Some of the letters indicate that Junius had painted portraits of some of his brothers. And when Junius went to New York, he went with William Cullen Bryant's nephew, who wanted to be a painter. And they really broke into the art world in New York by going to a building that published William Cullen Bryant's newspaper, I think it was.
Yeah.
And
New York Herald.
New York Herald. I think too that I love what you're doing here, and I think to myself, it does tell us what time of day it was, where the sun is coming down. What are the shadows, the glare in that one painting where the sun is right above, going straight down. And very few really long cast shadows, if any. And the last one with the flickering light of that yellow foliage is wonderful.
It is.
And there's a little bit of the glare look with this old snow. But I also, it's snow. But I just, there's a response to nature here that maybe is even more emphatically, if you think of the proportions of the frame. What one says prairie, that is that horizontal rectangle is twice as long as it is high. You see more sky than you see land. It's long. And then it's deep. That girl walking the cows to milk is foreground, and that extreme kind of perspective of the fence makes you go back. And then, of course, your fog warning. That is a really good observation. But then you look at the proportions of the paintings. Where is there another horizontal? That one behind you over there is a horizontal, but it's more vertical. And looking at a lot of them, studying them, you realize that these horizontal, the big one, were painted early in Frank Dudley's painting career, and they reflected again a kind of the horizontal. But the others were painted later, and they were painted what kind of land? Well, it varies from horizontal to vertical. And he was making a living as a painter then. And he had standard sizes, and they're off square, could fit into a wall that needed horizontal or a wall that needed vertical. They could fit a lot of places. Anyway, that's a few observations.
Thank you. Well, any other questions? I'll read you a very, very short poem by Emily Dickinson. No title. She published it in 1855. Dickinson writes, "To make a prairie, it takes a clover and one bee. One clover and a bee, and reverie. And reverie alone will do if bees are few." Next week, Sarah Gunderson and Reva Johnson will take a variety of perspectives, economic and financial, as well as engineering. Reva Johnson is a bioengineer, and she'll be beaming in from Washington, D.C., I believe. You won't see her, but you'll hear her. And we hope you'll come back and bring your friends with you. So that would conclude today's gallery talk. Teresa, thank you very much. Laurie, wonderful.